Hey there, we're here today with Marty Evans from Catalyst Golf Performance and Dr. Jason Rojano, lead chiropractic physician at Aligned Modern Health West Loop. Marty, thanks so much for being here today. We are in the beautiful Buckingham Athletic Club, right in the heart of Chicago's Loop, a full amenity fitness and recreation center managed by our partner, LifeStart. Marty, what is this space that we're in right now?
It's a little bit of heaven. This is our performance center. I own Catalyst Golf Performance, and what we do is we take you through every level of performance anxiety, and we kind of find it and point at it and say, we can fix that, or if we can't fix it, we figure out ways to work around it. So we always start with an assessment. We need to know how your physicality works, how your body works, and then we kick you into all the technology. Then we strap you into a 3D motion capture system from K-Motion Golf. We'll use body track, the pressure mass, to figure out how you interact with the ground. We also use TrackMan to look at how your all the club and ball data. We'll also strap you into our Quintic ball roll technology to really see how your putter is working for you or against you. So we're going to talk about grip, aim, stance, and posture, and how all those things are affected by our body, right? Our body dictates what our golf swing is going to look like. So if we know your physicality, we can coach you in a much better fashion. Let's start with the grip. Everybody has a grip that will naturally spread the club face through impact. You just have to figure out what yours is. Neutral grip kind of looks like that. We see two knuckles there, the V's to the trail shoulders, and then the trail hand is going to be in a similar fashion with that V pointing to the trail shoulder. Now, when it comes to aim, we have to make sure that we align the club with the bottom leading edge, and we want to make sure that club face stays nice and square to our target line. If it's this way, it's going to be closed. If it's this way, we call it open. And then from there, we want to talk about stance. Stance is important because we have to be able to rotate in this golf swing. The wider the stance, the more difficult it is to rotate, and we end up with too much lateral side slide and sway motion. So the stance for iron shots, like this one right here, we like to try to keep our feet about armpit width apart from there. Okay, so then down the line, we want to start to talk about some of that alignment and the posture and how that dials in. We turn to the side here, and you can see in the down the line view, we always shoot our cameras. If you're going to shoot some video for some people, always shoot directly at the hands so we can really see all of these angles. We'd like to have our feet, our knees, our hips, and our shoulders parallel to our target line. Okay? That's going to set you up for success and the best opportunity for hitting a shot right down your target. Now, from here, we also notice that there's a bit of a adjustment in the hands. The right hand is lower than the left on the golf club. Don't reach out over here because then your shoulders will be open. If you reach out underneath here, that's going to align your shoulders with your feet and your target line. Now, you just noticed that there's a little bit of a spine tilt going on there. So those are some things that we need to know. Can you physically move? Do you have hip mobility? Do you have structural stability throughout the rest of this physicality to be able to pull these things off? Can you maintain your posture in your golf swing at 100 miles an hour, right? So we have to have a good idea of what that posture is going to look like. So in the posture category, we take the club, put it right across here, shoulder blades back and down, stand up nice and tall, hinge forward, try to get a nice flat back as best we can. You can see even I have a little bit of curvature in my upper spine there. So I'm constantly working on that to try to neutralize that so I can be as athletic as I can through the golf shot. You also may notice that I have a tendency to kind of tuck my pelvis under a little bit there. So that lumbar spine has to be neutral to really optimize our athletic performance. Super important to get all these things correct, but if you do, I promise you, you'll be on your way to hitting better shots very quickly.
All right, so we're going to take a look at a couple different things based on Marty's assessment of how we go through posture and stance for the golf club, right? Let's take a good posture right here. So if you're looking at Marty's stance, he's got a nice hinge at the hip, right? What we're talking about is being able to set back that pelvis back here. He's able to load that hip and put the pressure on there, so he's not putting a lot of pressure on the low back. He had talked about his upper back being kind of curved this way. He's worked on it over the years. You can tell that he's fighting it and kind of opening up, so he's allowing himself to be able to open the upper thoracic spine and the lumbar spine without putting pressure on the area. If you look, everything is nicely stacked on this. When you're seeing with patients, one of the things that we'll see is that this stance will break down. So let's go into a bad. So here you can see that he's kind of shifted that hip forward. That puts a lot of extra pressure on the low back. If you're looking also too, his knees are a little bit more bent than he's used to, and so the pressure and the line of drive over his hip isn't there, and he's not distributing the weight evenly. And also, if you look, he's kind of rounding over and leaning back. So can you turn facing the camera so you can get that to he had talked about having all the weight right over the shaft, but he's kind of tilting to his right a little bit, and that's causing extra pressure that's happening in the lower back. One of the most common things we see with golfers is a lot of lower back stress, and if you start off with this bad position, it's already going to kind of lead you through your bad swings and injure that area. So we'll take a look at a couple different things based on how he actually swings, but this is one of the things that you can start with right away that'll help fix a lot of these issues.
Okay, so in our performance centers, we see lots of players. We take them through a full physical assessment so we understand how their body moves. If I know that as a coach, then I can better coach you to try to find solutions to help improve those particular situations. If we find a physical characteristic that is going to limit your ability to move and our trainers can't fix them, then we're going to send them to the proper physio. Somebody like Aligned, one of our partners, which will certainly help sort out the proper solutions. At that point, then we can get them back in the studios and they can make moves a lot more efficiently. So once we have you through a full physical assessment and we find a couple of those things that are issues, here's where we see golf swings typically break down. A lot of times it starts in the posture. So people have tough time with their hip hinge mechanics. They can't touch their toes, or they have tight hamstrings. Quite often we find that there's some dysfunction in the glute region back here, which then causes some problems in the hips. And then that's going to resonate potentially to the lower back or even the hamstrings, and that's going to cause some problems in the golf swing. That's going to limit your ability to go ahead and maintain posture and make a good golf swing and create a lot of energy from the ground, which is kind of where all that starts. Our interaction with the ground helps essentially put energy through the system, helps you get more distance and more club head speed and essentially more power and lower scores throughout your bag. Okay, so we typically see hip hinge issues. So we start with like a hip hinge kind of an exercise, a little crack in the knees. Then we want to make sure that they have good enough posture. As they turn away, we want to make sure that the arms, the trail arm here, has the proper external rotation of that shoulder. Because if not, we'll see people that can't move their arms and they'll get stuck up over the top. But if we can get that better mobility, then their arms can be in a much better organized position here. A lot of times we'll see our players, when they come in, they don't have the physicality to make a good, efficient athletic turn. Quite often that resides in the hip. So they talk about lower lumbar spine pain. That's typically because something else in the region isn't working, okay? So a lot of times we'll just see them just kind of take them through the arms up here and they don't have the ability to move much. But when we build some of that strength and stability, you can then easily go ahead and turn the thoracic as well as the lower half and be turning into a good, stable trail side. Hips are hugely important. If we don't have the proper mobility in our hips, we're going to have some problems here in the trail side hip and internal rotation. And then when we're internally rotating this side needs to be externally rotating, right? So when we go to the top of the backswing, we are doing just that. Internal rotation into the trail hip, external rotation in the lead hip, and then on the way down, guess what? We got to flip it at a high rate of speed and do it efficiently so we can put this stupid little club on that little ball. All right, so we want to get there from the top, lots of good hip mobility there, and if we can pull that off, we're going to be in pretty good shape. If not, we typically see people lose posture in their golf swing, or they don't have the ability to kind of stabilize in that region. And as we talked about earlier, it all resides in this pelvis. The pelvic powerhouse is huge. If we get some of that stability there, we can take some pressure off of your lumbar spine, and that helps with putting energy throughout the entire system. Now, as we're coming through here on the downswing, right, we have the external rotation here. We're getting into internal rotation and trying to get full extension through those hips. So as we're coming down through here, rotate there, and full extension there, there's a lot of internal rotation and a lot of pressure on that internal hip. If you don't have mobility there, that's going to be a problem. So let's get you checked out as soon as possible.
So we're going to take a look at a couple different things from the Align perspective of what we see with patients in office. Marty talked about the ability to be able to bring that hip back and come on forward. A lot of times with low back patients, we'll see that golf quite often is that they will rotate here. You'll get a little bit of movement in the hip, but you'll get all the movement from here. So you're getting a lot of this rotational torque that will put a lot of pressure on the lumbar spine and cause that irritation. That inability to bring the two together is what will drive that hip forward and allow that pressure to come off the back. So let's take a look at what Marty's doing. So from here, actually, no, you can face the camera. So now let's take a look at if it's a bad one. So if he's doing it incorrectly, what you'll see is that the lumbar spine and the thoracics will move without the hip, and the hip will pretty much stay almost neutral. When he comes across, he's going back and swing through a little bit. he's twisting and he's using his mid-back and shoulders to finish up the motion. You won't get a lot of power from that, especially if you're not using the hips. He talked about earlier being able to sit through the feet and generate that power through the whole kinetic chain. So if he's doing it correctly, go ahead and sit back on the hip. So go ahead and swing back. If you pause here, you can see that hip is pushed back. So there's a movement that's happening that's combining his lumbar spine and his hip together. And when he comes through on the swing, he's able to utilize, and you'll see the motion through the whole area. So what are some drills that we can take a look at? One of the first things we do when we do our assessment at Aligned is that we want to make sure individually each area is working the way it needs to. The golf swing is the end goal, but we want to make sure that every single piece of that kinetic chain is working the way we need to. So we're going to take a look at a couple different things to take a look at the thoracic spine, the lumbar spine, and then the hip, and a couple of different mobility exercises just to start off with that'll help move that golf swing into a better movement. We talked about earlier that rotation. That's one of the biggest things that I'll see is that if there isn't any rotation, that golfer is trying to compensate and pull with different areas. And so you get these compensation injuries. So you want to start off with that. So let's start with this. Can you get on your hands and knees for me? Mm-hmm. Okay. So one of the first things we'll take a look at is put your right hand behind your neck.
Neck?
Yep. And you're going to rotate all the way up as high as you can. This is one of the simplest ways for us to kind of evaluate what's going on in the thoracic spine. How much movement. From the angle of the camera, you can see how much his shoulder's going up. And if he's got good movement, he'll be able to get to almost toward the ceiling. Now switch.
So I have a question for you.
Sure.
In that assessment, I can just feel my ribs cramping up over there right now. So what would we talk about from there?
That mobility, the ribs cramping, the musculature across the rib cage and the obliques and the abdominals are not rotating as much as they could be, so you're also not getting that full control. We'll get to the core component of being able to utilize that mobility, but one of the simplest things is that if there's no mobility, then you're not going to get any power anyways. You can see that his left side going up higher here, he's got more movement, so he's able to turn that thoracic spine. Go back to the other side, and switch. So he gets stuck a little bit sooner and he's forcing that rotation. So we can tell that this right oblique chain is something that we'll have to focus on going down the line. Okay? Perfect. One of the simplest remedies for that is using the foam roll. This is a simple way at home when he's working with himself, be able to kind of open up that mobility. Tracy, come on over here. I'm going to have you lie on your side on the ground. Okay? So lay on your side. So I'm going to have him bottleneck straight. And then put this one here. We're going to bring this hip up. So we're going to utilize that hip motion because we want to get the movement from the the thoracic spine and the lumbar spine without the hip. So what I want you to do is you're going to squeeze inward here. Put this right arm forward so you're okay, and then reach your left hand across, and then reach across, and then come back up and over while squeezing this into this area. So one of the things you'll notice is that as he's doing it, you're keeping the hips locked out just because you want to be able to isolate that area of movement. As he's rotating across, he's getting a lot more movement through the thoracic and lumbar spine. Now let's go back and hold. If you're working with a trainer, if you're working with someone from Aligned, you're working with anybody, that little extra motion will help pull and stretch that rib cage area you're talking about where it's a little bit tight. So that opens it up even more and allows for better mobility. Back, one more time. And bring it back. So this was the side that he was having difficulty on the initial assessment. You can tell that he's straining to pull that. So we'll give him a little extra stretch that'll open that up a little bit more. He should feel a lot of that through the thoracic and the lumbar spine as he's moving across. Again, engaging that hip to lock that out so all the motion is coming from here and you're not compensating down here while just working on mobility. Back up, one more time. And let's kind of stretch. Getting that little extra stretch, you can feel that. Okay, perfect. Come on up. Let's go back on your hands and knees and see how that mobility is looking. So rotate up. Already you can tell right there, he's got a lot more motion. He's almost able to get to the ceiling. Come back down. Switch. Now this was the better side, so he should still have good mobility, but he should get even just a little bit extra, couple degrees of rotation. So you can tell now he doesn't have to fight that rotation with his golf swing. So one of the biggest things that we are going to look at next is the ability of the femur, so the long part of the leg, to rotate inside of the hip. That's doing a lot of the hip mobility. There's a lot of stuff that happens with the pelvis, but as well as the femur, we want to be able to kind of get that to be able to move in there as you're going through your golf swing. So we're going to go through a couple, two different positions in this seated position. It's going to internally rotate that femur and externally rotate that femur. So we're looking at that, the ability of the leg to actually rotate inside that hip. You want that to be mobile, you want that to move around, so when you're going through your golf swing, there's none of that lag or kind of compacting in there. You want to be able to move that around and have it fluid. So this is one of the easiest ways to work on that mobility of the femur, okay? So I'm going to have you sit up straight. You want to start always with a good posture up front. You're going to internally rotate this right leg, externally rotate that left leg, right? So if he's doing this well, he's going to be able to sit upright and hold that position. Just put your arms out for me. So let's hold this here. So he's got a pretty good lumbar and thoracic spine throughout here. It's very upright. Now try to externally rotate that hip down, or the femur down, so pushing that knee to the ground while keeping this upright. You should feel a lot of cramping.
That's all I got.
That's all you got, right? So this is a good way to kind of work. You want to be able to drive this down, but you'll notice that if he's rocking too much, he doesn't have the mobility, he'll come off teeter and he'll actually not be able to hold that upright position. There we go. Now let's go ahead and switch to the other side. This is a good way for us to assess between the two femurs which one is having difficulty. If you can look, his right leg gets a little bit closer to the ground already. You can go ahead and push this one down. How does that feel in that hip?
Tight?
Yeah. If you're looking at this pelvis from here, you can tell that there's a little bit of a shift on here. So this one doesn't internally rotate at the femur as well. So he's kind of hiked up off the ground. There's a little bit of space underneath here. That's letting us know that in this hip that we need some more mobility work. Rotating back and forth between these two positions will allow us to be able to work on the mobility of the femur and allow it to kind of open up for the golf swing. So being able to mobilize the femurs and work on that hip, you can take that position that we use as an assessment and kind of go back and forth between the two to really sit into those different positions. So from here, you go back over, and then sit there for a few seconds while you're in each position. Really try to drive those legs into the end range. Back again. And one more. To make it harder, if you wanted to do this sitting upright without supporting himself with the hands, that'll force him to be able to use his core and try to keep his upper body stable while he's going through it. So you can, there we go. That's tight. And come back. You can tell that he's pulling through some of, in this right hip, there's getting a lot of like scrunching, and he's compressing that lumbar spine here, so he's not being able to separate those two out, and he's getting a lot of constriction in that hip, so he doesn't get the full mobility that he needs to. This is a simple way to be able to work on this, but as he goes through it, that should open up quite a bit. So Marty had talked about hinging as a big part of the posture for golf. We want to be able to make sure that you're getting to that hip hinge through here, and that's the ability to separate that hip back a little bit, get that soft break in the knees, and sit back on the hip and load it. So let's take a look at the hinge right here. Okay, and hinge. So what you're getting is that you've got, from straight up, you're bending at the pelvis. One problem we see quite often is that you'll get a lot of bend through the lower back. So people get to a certain point and they'll kind of round out that lower back to try to finish out the motion. If they're doing that, then again, they're putting themselves in a position that's going to compromise that lower back, potentially cause some injury down the line as they go through the round. Coming back up. One of the simplest ways, if you're working on hinging at home, so I'll cue this one up, I'll take this. Simplest ways is, put your hands on your legs. You want to be able to kind of bend forward, but keep your hands perfectly perpendicular and come back up. And that's just a simple way of working on that hinging. You take it as far as until you feel that low back change positions. If it's neutral here, but you get to a point where you're starting to round out, you've gone too far. So you want to be able to work on this hinging mechanic. And you can take this all the way down as far as you can. It's a good hinging technique, but it also helps stretch out the hamstrings a little bit. That's another part of the equation that can get complicated, so you want to be able to work that, and that will allow you to stretch that area and kind of focus on that mechanics. So we're going to take a look at glute activation. We want to be able to stabilize those hips, and glute activation is a big part of that. A lot of times we'll see with lower back patients is that they are compensating in the lower back and actually not using the glutes as much as they should be. This is a couple different ways that you can assess the glute activation and making sure that it's working to a couple different positions. So let's start with a regular glute bridge. So arms to the side for me, feet here. What we want to do is lift this hip off the ground, so up, and then bring it down, and we'll hold it at the top. One of the things we want to ask the patient is, what are they feeling? Does it feel like their glute is firing? Does it feel like their hamstring is cramping up? Are they getting any lower back pain? We want to see where in this link that they're not getting the activation that they need. A lot of times we'll see the low back and the hamstrings are the ones that are taking over because their glute isn't firing. Now, if that patient is able to do that and they feel like it's working in the hips and it's not, not too much cramping in the hamstrings or low back, the next thing they can do to check that stability is come back down, go ahead and bring your arms up in the air. So without using the arms to help stabilize, this is all posterior chain still, so it's still hamstring, glutes, and low back. Lift up. So he doesn't have the hands to be able to stabilize. Again, same thing, assessing what's going on here in the hamstrings, what's going on in the glutes, what's going on in the low back. If, again, he's getting low back pain or if he's getting any kind of hamstring cramping, another thing we can do to help cue him is push out against my hand. And typically, if he's able to do that, that'll take some of that pressure off the low back and kind of ease up on the hamstring, and his glute will fire up a little bit easier. So again, if he's pushing out against my hand, he'll get a little bit more glute activation by cueing it this way. Down. Now for someone who's able to do that, you can take it a step further and really assess where they're having issues. Go back up, and this is a little bit more advanced if they've cleared those first two bridges. If they can extend the one leg out, it really forces the unilateral, so the one-legged stability, again, seeing if the hamstring, glute, or low back is taking over. Switch, go back up, and other leg. If they can clear all of this, then we know that the activation is happening, but we'll see that a lot of patients will have one side that's weaker than the other, and that can give you a cue on why some of their rotation or their activation isn't happening the way it needs to. One of the biggest things that we take a look at with golfers as well, especially if there's any kind of lower back pain or instability through the golf swing, is the ability to engage the core. Everyone talks about core and working the core and being able to do different things. There are a few assessments you can take a look at to kind of see if that engagement is happening. The simplest one you can take a look at is the dead bug. The dead bug is on your back, it takes the pressure off the lower back, so it's a very safe position to challenge, but it's one of the simplest ways for us to be able to see, is there any core activation? So, from this position, you want to take a look at the arms up in the air, and you want to take the legs off the ground, both legs, and hold this position. You want this 90-90 position, and you want to be able to see, is there any contraction that's happening in the abdominal core, right? Let's hold that position right through here. We'll hold this for a few seconds. We should be able to see engagement. One of the biggest things that we want to take a look at is the ability of the person's abdomen to contract a little bit. So there should be some tightness that's going on through here. If they don't feel that, or if it's causing some lower back pain, some of the things you can do to cue to see if they need work on their firing the core is if they push the hands down against me, it should feel a little more core activation happening, right? So if there's any low back pain, again, cueing this up here will engage that here. That's the same thing if you were to bring the lower legs into you. If you pull them towards each other, it's almost like a crunch, but you're getting engagement to that core. You want golfers to be able to feel like contraction so that they can stabilize through their motions. You don't want all that mobility without that stability. So that's one of the biggest things is that people will stretch, they'll mobilize, but they won't keep that contracted. They won't be able to control it. So you want to make sure you build both sides of that coin. Down. So the next one we want to take a look at is that if they're doing well with the dead bug and they've been able to go through a couple different progressions for it, you want to work on combining the core with the hip. So we take a look at the bird dog, it'll combine both motions and allow them to work on both. We can see if they're working synergistically or if one's not working without the other. So come up, let's get on your hands and knees. So let's put your right arm forward and your left leg back, thumbs up in the air. With the bird dog, you get almost like a plank-like core activation. You're getting a lot of activation through here, but you're also getting hip extension as well as glute activation through here. One thing we'll see is that, especially in the core, and this is good for golfers, if there's any rotational core instability, meaning inability to kind of stabilize this, that like he was showing, his hip will drop down. So he'll rotate here, and he's not stable through here. You want to be able to have a flush, a little bit right there, just there. You want this line to be nice and straight, and you don't want any rotation going back and forth. It's probably cramping out here at this point, but then you're getting a lot of hip activation here, and as long as both of these areas are working, you know that they're going to work better in the golf swing. Go and switch. Here you can see that this hip wants to fight and come up a little bit, right? So there's a little less rotational core activation that's happening here. That's good. Arms here. Another one for the upper back, since we're also talking about the thoracic spine, you can't forget that, is that if his arm isn't going up and he's getting a lot of stiffness through here, there's a lot of lat tightness that's going on in thoracic instability that could be happening. So you want to make sure that you address this as well and not just only here. So tying it all together. Going back one more time. Switch sides. Let's rotate it towards the camera. So we're going to do the same thing. So right arm up first. So if you look here, there's not a lot of motion that's happening with his hips. It's pretty straightforward. Come back down and go back out the same side. There's not a lot that's happening, right? So he's pretty stable through here. Now switch. He's starting to waver a little bit. He's rotating a little bit. He's coming off the ground. So this side is the side that he needs to focus on, because there's just that slight bit of instability that's going on through this area. Okay. The next thing we want to take a look at is that if they've been able to kind of graduate through these different areas, we want to start taking a look at their ability to stabilize the core and actually rotating. So come on up. Stand up for me. So when we're talking about stabilizing and rotation, we're talking about the ability of the core to be able to stabilize and control this motion. So we're not looking at the bending motion, we're not looking at the side-to-side motion, we're actually looking at rotating and the spine. You want that mobility, but if you don't have that stability with it, that also still leaves you up for potential risk. So one of the simplest ways we can challenge that is I'm going to have you grab the strap here.
Grab both of them?
Just grab this one right here. Okay, so with some tension across here, push your arms out in front. This allows me to put resistance in the rotational plane, and he's fighting against it to be able to stabilize. Holding this position right here will allow the core to work in the rotational plane, and the longer you can do this, you're building up endurance. Now, if he's able to do it more, he can turn away from me to build some strength into that. So there you go. Now he's working on controlling it as well as strengthening it. Let's switch to the other side. Same thing here with a lot of different golfers. You can see if one side or the other is having difficulty, but this is a good way to kind of challenge both sides of the rotation and see where you're having some of those rotational core instabilities. Working up this way allows you to be able to make sure that the rotational component is working the way it needs to. So when we talk about core, there's a couple different things we look at, right? We talk about core and a lot of the activities that we want to work on, but what is the actual core? If you're looking at the core, it is actually a system. It's not the abdominals, it's not just one piece, it's how this whole midsection works. And what we're talking about is, up top is the diaphragm, down below is the pelvic floor. From the sides you have the oblique abdominal muscles, and then actually from the turn facing that way, you actually have your lower back and your straight abdominals. That whole section creates a cylinder, like a pop can, that is your core. You want that to be stiff, you want that to have pressure, you want there to be stability through there, because like a pop can, if you open up that pressure, that can get crushed. If it's not, it's pretty firm, and it's the same thing for the core. You want to be able to work both the diaphragm, pelvic floor, front and the back, lower back, and the front side, as well as the obliques, be able to stabilize this. If you can stabilize that, that'll help control a lot of what's going on in your core.
Okay, so in this particular situation, we're really trying to help you stabilize better in the trail side. So we're creating some resistance going back that direction, and we need to be able to stabilize that. So I'm in my golf posture, arms across my shoulders. You can see the kind of strap is wrapped up here and around my body. As I pivot back into this side, he's pulling me, so I don't want to. He's pulling me, makes me want to go that way. So I have to stabilize here. If we don't have that good hip stability and core stability, that's going to be a challenge for me. So as we pivot back into here, and now we want to start to rotate this way. We have to get this lead hip out of the way, so now we can drive with that trail hip and get into full extension here. So I'll do one at speed, back here, right through there. Doc, what do you think?
It's good. From our perspective, this allows a couple different things. Again, he's talking about this pulling back, so if he's got to stabilize just holding that position right there, he's already getting pulled back, and he's got to make sure that he's tightening up through that rotational core component. This pulling back against him and then him resisting against it is building both that mobility and stability through that area, finishing off the golf swing through that hip extension all the way. This is a little bit more advanced when you get into the rehab component with our patients. This allows them to really kind of focus on speed through the motions and kind of working on it in more of a late stage situation. But this is another way to kind of assess how they're being able to use the rotational stability through the golf swing. So one of the best ways to activate the glutes, especially from the side-to-side motion, is adding a band around and taking a look at side-to-side steps or duck walks, however different ways you want to call it. Its ability to engage that glute in that transverse plane, going side to side and working that glute through that activation. The resistance band through here will force that hip to work against it, and both sides of it will allow it to work bilaterally. You can see that he's got to get the engaged motion. He's still working on that hinging component of it, and he's got that whole engagement of that chain. Okay.
So we use these bands a lot in our performance center, simply because typically most of our players have that posterior chain inactivation stuff. So we want to prevent injury as much as we can. So we really want to turn on the glutes and light them up like a Christmas tree. Here's one of my favorite ways to do that. We just showed you the side walks, but now we're going to do the monster walks. And we not only do this forward, but we do it backward as well. So we want to keep the feet about shoulder width apart, back through here, as we're working our way back there, and then forward. Keeping the width all the way through these exercises. Get after it, you're going to feel those glutes turn on, and I promise you, your golf swing will be able to stabilize much, much better. That's also going to take a little bit of the mobility concerns out of your hips, because when this side is stable, you can now get more mobility in your hips.
Dr. Hanna, thank you so much for taking us through that. Folks, if you are finding that you're having any difficulty golfing at the level that you want to be at, we are absolutely here for you and happy to help at Align Modern Health. We have both a free injury screening and a free sports movement assessment that we can offer through our chiropractic physical medicine practice to help you determine and assess where some of those deficiencies might be, and then we can absolutely go through and help determine how we can help improve upon them. We are here for you and happy to help at alignmodernhealth.com or at the phone number going across your screen. Again, Dr. Hanna, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And we hope you have a great golf season.